Greetings, brothers and sisters. So I've changed my position again this morning on Robert Kennedy Jr. There are two videos I watched, one this morning and one yesterday. And it's complex. It's not simple, what I'm going to say here. But YouTube's been recommending a lot of RFK videos to me because I watched a lot of them in the past. And I haven't clicked on any of them other than these two, maybe one or two, I don't know, others that I can't remember. You know, there was a lot of them that were recommended to me, probably like 50 or so videos since I've, my sort of, my support for him has dampened. But I watched this one yesterday, and I was going to make a video, I was going to include it in a video, and it made me feel, that he sort of cheapened some of his message. So I had a negative reaction to this video. This is how I overcame addiction, Team Kennedy. And then this one this morning, I had a positive reaction to, and it was from 3 weeks ago. Kennedy Values University. And this one, he's talking about the same thing. And I had a positive reaction to one and a negative reaction to the other. And so I'm going to show you clips of them side by side, or back to back, not side by side. And we're going to watch both of these together. And I'll tell you my reaction. I think it's kind of interesting. It shows you, the whole, I don't know, the yin and the yang of it, right? The whole, the good and the bad, all of the binary aspect of life. So this is how I overcame addiction.
I started taking drugs soon after my dad's death. I started when I was 15 years old. I didn't like being an addict. I wanted to stop. And that's when I picked up this book called Synchronicity by Carl Jung. Jung was a disciple of Freud's, and they were kind of the co-fathers of modern psychiatry. Jung says people who believe in God get better faster, and that the recovery is more durable than people who do not. And so I just said there's God up there watching me 24 hours a day, and that life is just a series of tests. And every day is broken to about 40 different decisions, and I invested each one of those decisions with a moral dimension. For example, when the alarm goes off in the morning, do I stay in bed with my indolent thoughts, or do I jump right out of bed and get the day going? Do I hang up the towels?
Okay, so I didn't see this interview, this part of the Jimmy Dore interview, but I've heard this spiel before. I dislike the music, and I, the problem I have with it is, the biggest problem here is, I like what he's saying on some level. And I like that he's doing this as a candidate. Like, it's different than we've seen with any other candidate. What I don't like is that he said he came to, come to Jesus moment. He came to God, and, it wasn't Jesus. Like, he had his own spiritual experience, which I, prefer. It's not religious, but it's spiritual. And he had this moment, and it helped him with addiction. And he said this was his one thing he couldn't beat with his will force in other interviews. And I like all that. The problem is that he was womanizing up until, at least, as far as I know, the articles that came out were in 2015. That he had this diary and all these things. And I don't know, what his issues have been since then. I don't know if he's conquering his womanizing issues, but he needs to address those, because he said he had a come to God moment that helped him with his drug addiction, but afterwards he was womanizing for a number of years. 37 women in 1 year is what was written in his diary, and that's after this whole come to Jesus moment. Let's go to the other video now.
During my younger years, when I was addicted to drugs and following my own self, I found out that the only way that I can live effectively, and for me, it meant living at all, because drugs were going to kill me, is by turning my life over to God or my higher power, whatever you want to call it. The bad thing for me and the poisonous thing for me is when I am serving self-will other than God's will. So I try to wake up every morning and stay in that posture of surrender. And actually, the hardest time is when my life is going well, because it's easy for me to turn my life over to God when things are going badly. All the cash and prizes start flowing into my life. It's much more difficult, and I have to maintain that posture of surrender. I try to wake up every morning and say, reporting for duty, sir, and then
So, this is great what he's saying here, because any spiritual person knows this is exactly what he's talking about. This is exactly what you go through as a spiritual person. That, when you turn your life over to God, it's a battle. And this is what I've experienced doing the Sajmarg method. You can't compare things just because he doesn't have the method and the advantages that I have doing Sajmarg, the Sajmarg transmission and cleaning. He doesn't have all those things. This is something he just did on his own. And so it's limited, and he's a material-based person. He's doing work in the material world. So he's not going to have the same level of spirituality, but he's stepped onto the spiritual field. Like, whether he sucks at it, whether he's flawed, whether he's, a womanizer or a drug addict, he's at least stepped onto the spiritual field, which I've talked about so much in my recent videos. That Master Charji, the third master of the Sajmarg system, said that it has to be understood that the lowest part of the higher, which is the spiritual, is higher than the highest part of the lower, which is the material. People who are based solely in the material world, in the Sajmarg system, we have two wings of a bird, of the, what we're doing in terms of gratefulness, that you need two wings to fly. You need a spiritual wing and a material wing. And there's spiritual people who withdraw from the material world, and they have just a spiritual life, and they don't achieve the spiritual goals that they have set for themselves because they're negating their material life. But for the most part, those people don't really exist in mass numbers, and it's less and less now that the world has become so materialistic, and people focus only on the material world. And so everything he says here is spot on, and he can't make it up. Like, he can't, he can embellish this and he can self-aggrandize this, but it's, there's truth in what he's saying here. And he's, deeply flawed with these addictions and these issues, but at least he's trying to be a spiritual person, regardless if you want to say he's a shill or, his horrible position on Palestine and Israel conflict. These are all bad things. These are all things going against him. But he's different than other candidates. And the other piece to this is they're using his admission that he is a drug addict, and maybe this is political strategy, which sure it is. It's political strategy. He's going in because he's not going to be able to deny he was arrested and charged with using heroin when he was a district attorney, right? One of his first jobs as a lawyer. Like, he's had these issues. His book's out there of him being a womanizer. And so, like he even said himself, if all the skeletons in his closet could vote, he would be president of the world. Like, he's got lots of them. He's got a wife who committed suicide. He's got all these issues, right? And so, he's got no choice but to take them on directly. And so whether it's a political strategy or not, he's still saying the right things here. He's doing something different. He's not pretending to be perfect. He's not pretending that he's the greatest guy in the world. That, Biden and Trump and all these people, that's how their campaigns frame. I mean, that's been going on forever, that he's some great guy. He's not doing that. He's saying he's deeply flawed. And without surrendering to God, he sucks. And the other part that he says, when things are going great, it's easy to forget about God. And that's with everybody. When things are going your way, it's so easy to forget about God. That's why rich people don't go to heaven. There's a, Master Charji, the third master of the Sajmarg system. He told this story where, there's all these people waiting on the gates of heaven, and St. Peter is, not that that's what we believe in Sajmarg, but it's, different. We've talked about that before. But this is just, his story. He pulled from all the, various religious stories. But there's a line of people waiting to get into the gates of heaven. And then a famous rich person is brought up in a limousine and a red carpet's rolled out on the side where all the other people are waiting. And that person's marched right to the front of the line. And there's a guy in the back of the line and he's like getting pissed off by it. So he gets up to the front of the line and he goes, back then, hours ago when this guy came in, we're all waiting in line. We're all good people. We're all poor people. We're all, hardworking people. And this famous rich person comes in and gets the red carpet treatment. And I'm like, even in heaven, we work so hard to be good people. So our rewards would come after we die. And we find out there's still all this special treatment for these, celebrity rich people. And St. Peter says to him, my son, people like you come here every day, but someone like that, a rich, famous person, is 1 in a million. So when they come here, we roll out the special treatment. And so that's something to understand, like the whole, that saying it's easier for a camel to pass through an eye of a needle than a rich person to make it into heaven. And this is one of the primary teachings in the Sajmark system, that when things are going well, it's hard to connect to God. But when things are going poorly, people run to God. All of a sudden, people are praying and, things are not going the way they want and, they blame God for whatever's going on. They don't think about God. They don't reward God when things are going great. As one of the teachings is when you're enjoying yourself, when you feel pleasure, you don't think about God. You don't share your pleasure with God. Oh, God, look, I'm so happy. I'm so grateful. I want to share this moment with you. God, I want you to experience my joy and my pleasure. The pleasure is yours. But when you are miserable, you want to share your miseries with God. You want God to bear your miseries. God, I can't do this. I can't. You get on your knees and pray. And so what he's saying here is spot on. Regardless of his fallings, regardless of his addictions, regardless of his limitations as a human being, and even this idea of surrendering to God. And it's something new. And even if he's not at all sincere about it, and he has to be a little bit, like he can't, someone who hasn't experienced this can't talk about it. Trump couldn't talk about this. Biden couldn't talk about this. They don't have this depth of character and experience. So he's had this experience. There's sincerity here. What degree of sincerity, it's not really for me to assess or really care about, but at least he's doing something we've never seen a candidate do. And so for that, there has to be some level of, I don't want to say respect, but, admission that he's different than the other ones, which is there. And I'm not psyched about his positions and some of these things I've been covering, he's got some issues, right? Like everybody does. And, even with his sincerity here, he can't change a dying system. I mean, those things I've always said from the beginning. But he is at least somewhat sincere here. And let's go back to the other one.
After I get out of my shower, or do I say that's somebody else's job? I'm too busy for that. I'm too important for that. But 6 weeks after I got sober, my life began to get big quickly. And I was running through National Airport, and I was late for a plane, and it was mission critical. I had to be on that plane. And as I was running, I was putting a stick of Dentine in my mouth. And I rolled up the wrapper, and I was running past a trash can, and I threw the wrapper, and it made a perfect arc right swish into the middle of the trash can. But as I was running past, I saw it must have hit something in there, and it bounced back out. And I said to myself, well, that's God's fault, because I made a shot. And maybe 40, 50, 60 steps later, it just started eating at me. And I finally put the brakes on, and I went back and put the wrapper in. I did make the plane, but for me, probably the most important thing I did that day was to put that wrapper back in that trash can, because staying in that posture of surrender, even when the cash and prize are flowing into your life, is the hard part, because
So he's said this story. I heard the story on Math Hoffa. This exact same story. So it's a story he's telling, and it's a good story. A spiritual person and taking accountability and, all that. It bothered me. Again, I didn't get to this far in the video because I stopped it at the first part. I didn't like the music here. And, the glaring issue for me is the womanizing, which is, what he called his lust demon. And he hasn't really addressed that. And that happened after he had his spiritual awakening, which again would. Like, I'm not, he's a flawed person, and he's struggling to be spiritual, and he's just, a newbie at it. He's not an expert. I mean, I'm sure he's maybe has some past lives as a spiritual person. That's there. But in terms of, are they just using these stories and this template because he realizes that this is the age of truth because of what's happened on the internet, and they've included this in their strategy, this campaign, that this is how they're marketing him as a truthful candidate. He's just going to tell the truth about himself. He's not going to, minimize things. He's in fact going to actually maximize these things, tell these stories over and over again, talk about his addiction, make him a real person, because it's hard to make him a real person because he's a Kennedy, right? And so there's a strategy here, a political strategy, and it's a good one. I'm glad he's doing it. I'm glad somebody's actually telling the truth and being like this, being transparent, being, not being Superman, not being perfect, not being, trying to market himself as some, a saint or whatever, because that stuff sucks, because it's a lie. These politicians are all narcissists. And he certainly has his issues. He has lots of them. He has psychological issues. He's had these addictive issues. He has, the family trauma that's gone on, and it's, all these things. And so there's no way for him to not do this and be a viable candidate. He has to stand out. He has to be different. And he's different in that he's telling the truth. Is it, is it sincere? Well, at least partly it's sincere. Like, you don't have these realizations and not be partially sincere. But is it completely sincere? No, it's not, because, it's a campaign, and there's a strategy here, right? So, I have mixed feelings about it, is what I'm saying. Let's go to the other one.
I break every day down into a series of decisions, about 40 decisions that I have to do every day. And each one now, to me, has a moral dimension. So when the alarm goes off in the morning, do I stay in bed for an extra 10 minutes with my indolent thoughts, or do I get right up and begin my day?
And I always like these things with the music behind it. And he's not a Christian. Like his, the Carl Jung thing, which I already established. Here's they're putting a cross in here. Like, I didn't get to this far in the video. I never liked the music. I know he has issues with his voice. I've talked about this with the heartfulness videos from my, there's a failed aspect of the heartfulness meditation. It was corrupted by the current master of the system, which was very painful for me, which I talked about in my Journey series. I'm not going to cover it here. But they use music, and there's energy. Like, there's energy in my voice. And, if you are sitting there and saying God is here and I am not, or God is with me and God's doing this work, and I'm surrendering to God, which is the point of his video, then let the energy flow. Music is manipulative. Again, this is a campaign, and, they have to maybe dumb it down. I'm not going to slam them for that. But using a cross here, like, this is a video I liked better, but, the beginning I liked really a lot, what he was saying. And he's saying the same thing here. I had a reaction, like I said, a mixed reaction for both of these videos. One, I had a good reaction, one, I had a bad reaction, but now I'm watching them both and I have a mixed reaction. But what he's saying here is, like, he can't make this stuff up. He's at least gone through this process, and he's at least stepped on the spiritual field of activity. And so that's that wins him big points for me, because he's on a higher level of existence than people who are just material in nature. Trump has, maybe flirts with spirituality. Biden, he doesn't ever whiffed it, right? But both of them are materialistic people. They're lower level. They haven't made it onto that higher plane. And, he's a newbie on this plane, Kennedy, at least in this life. And he's, and he's using this as a marketing tool, which is, I'm glad that he's doing it, but, it sort of cheapens it a little bit, but it is what it is, right? It's better. I'm glad, it's mostly a positive. I would say it's 90% positive. And 10%, just a little bit, using it as a way to connect with people and win them over. But, there's that. Let's go forward with this one.
I try to begin my day with a prayer. Most important thing I ever do every day is to make my bed. When I take a shower, do I hang the towels back up? When I reach into the closet and pull out a pair of blue jeans and a lot of those little wire hangers fall on the floor, do I shut the closet door and say I'm too much of a big shot for those? That's somebody else's job. Or do I do what I'm supposed to do and go and clean that up? Do I put the shopping cart back or do I leave it in the parking lot? And all of these are ultimately moral choices, because when I do the little things right, the rest of my life actually works.
So what he's doing here is there's 8 limbs of Patanjali's Ashtanga Yoga. In the Sajmark tradition of meditation that I do, Babaji, the second master of the system, was Patanjali in a previous life. And the 8 limbs, and I'm not an expert on it, but the first ones are Yama and Niyama. And they're like right livelihood. And so if you were going to go into an ashram somewhere, they would make you scrub toilets. And they would make you chop, peel potatoes and chop vegetables. They would not, you'd wash your hands first. They would make you do, sweep and clean and, all these things, right? And do it in a way where you're mindful. Do it in a way where you're serving God and you're doing this. And this is what he's talking about here. Like, so he's on the first limb of Patanjali's yoga, learning about ethics, learning about morality, learning about making your choices and devoting these things in surrender to God. What's great about the Sajmark system, you come in at the 5th limb or the 6th limb of the yoga, which is concentration, meditation, and samadhi. Those are the last 3 limbs. You bypass the first limbs. You're supposed to get those in your life before you, or you get them in the, whatever it is, you're just your daily life. You're supposed to learn these things on your own. And hopefully you have. But if you haven't, then, you have to integrate those into your practice. But waiting 20 years to meditate, which is what would happen under Ashtanga Yoga, is, you're losing all that time connecting to God. And so, what he's saying here is like remedial first level, spirituality 101. And there's sincerity here. You can see it. For those of you who can see it, you can see it. And I'm glad he's saying these things, but it's just an initial step. And, he's using his spiritual life for something material, which is to win people over to vote for him. And, again, I don't mind that, but it is what it is. It's a lower thing. I am glad to see it enter into politics, is what I'm saying. That the truth stuff, the truth community stuff that he does, and, all the rest of these things, being a truther, to whatever level he's on, and being a spiritual person, whatever level he's on, you got to admit this is something new. No candidate has tried it. And even if he's not 100% sincere, well, at least it's a step in the right direction. Again, he's not going to save this system because it can't be saved. So at least, doing something differently, there's something here. There's something positive here is what I'm saying. I'm in the editing process here, and I want to add something. Steve Bannon got Trump to embrace right-wing truther narratives. Trump actually did this a little bit on his own before he was a candidate. Like, he talked about Barack Obama's birth certificate. He was sort of anti-boop for a while, right? Because women came up and talked to him about their autistic kids. So Trump had done this a little bit on his own. Like, he was a little bit of a truther in a, very superficial, Trump is still more important than anything else kind of a way, like in his own mind, right? But he did embrace this to some extent. And that's a positive because, he was doing it for his own gain, his own personal gain. He was using the truth community. He was using, what he's doing now to the Cubies. And he wasn't really a truther. He was about himself, but he was using his ability to actually acknowledge our existence. Because everybody else is like, you guys are crazy conspiracy theorists that are destroying the world. Like, that's the official position. And Trump actually was, saying, I'm going to look at these group of people and bring them into the fold. for his own ends, right? And Kennedy could be doing the same thing. I'm not, I don't think he is. I think he actually believes these things, but it's not, 100% truth. They're like where, 100% truth or someone seeking the truth. And the other things that we do, whether we make videos or we relate our findings to you all like I do here, it's really not about that. That's the way I can make a living. That's the way I can, express myself and get these things out. And it's, good for me on a personal level, and it might help you. But the real path for truth is internal. You got to find your own, reality, your own, not your own reality, because that's the reality, the divine reality. And there's always the divine truth. And it's a, never ending path of change and higher levels of perception. You're always going to see things clearer or, more in focus, and you're going to have these epiphanies one after the other. And it's going to change the way that you think about things. Like when I first heard Kennedy, I saw that he was different, and I embraced what he was doing. And then I heard, him talk his take on Palestine, and more information came to me. And then, of course, the stuff with the womanizing, and I changed my position again because more information had come. It's an evolutionary process, right? But then I, was compelled to watch these two videos, and not, they were the only two videos I watched that were recommended about Kennedy, and they're very similar. I'm going to go back to the other one here in a second. And they're very similar in nature. And, I had one reaction to one, and a more positive reaction to one, and a more negative reaction to the other. And he's basically telling the same story, in both videos. And so that's how it is. Like, it's not black or white. It's not binary. It's not good or bad. There's complexities, right? Especially now we live in such a complex world of, so much information and all these things. And that's my point here. And Kennedy definitely has made a step to the next level as a politician, as a spiritual person, and as a truther in his way. We all are truthers in our way. All of us here. Like, even the woke people to some extent, and the QBs to some extent. I mean, they're remedial in their approach to truth because they haven't really changed. The more you change and the more you're willing to change, the more of a truther you are. And I don't mean externally, I mean internally. The more that you're willing to be flexible and, realize you don't really ever know it, and you're never going to know it. You're not going to know the truth the way you would like, because there's just so much more to it than meets, that is beyond some black and white, yes or no, or these things, right? That ultimately the truth is God and divinity, and you can't know God, right? You can feel God, you can feel God's love, but you can't know God. Your mind doesn't have the capacity to know all the things that God knows or know everything that God is. Your mind your mind is limited, and God is infinite, right? So, there's all that. Let's get back to it here. So then let's wrap up this first video, how I overcame addiction.
Explanation is to say, thanks God, I got it from here, and then take the wheel and drive the car off the cliff again. And the challenge is for somebody like me, it's how do you stay in that posture of surrender? What I find is when I do the little things right, that God takes care of the big things. Addiction is about ultimately abusing power, and we're all given certain powers. You have the power to make people laugh. People have education, they have connections, they have money, whatever the power is. The challenge, even as the power amplifies, is how do we make sure it's not being deployed to serve selfish ends, but it's, being deployed for some higher purpose. If you like this video and you want to help me become president of the United States, go to Kennedy24.com and donate now.
So, everything he said at the end, I like. And again, he's struggling. The part that bugged me was that he hasn't addressed the sexual addiction, his lust demon, which is something he had for years after all these things. He was working on his routine, but he was still, failing in that arena, womanizing and, these issues, which I have covered extensively in my other videos. And, he's going to have to address that at some point because it's there. I mean, unless the media doesn't decide to bring that up, and I don't know why they wouldn't. And it's, just being an honest and truthful person, he has to talk about that. Because, yeah, it's one thing to say he was a drug addict when he was young, but he had a sexual addiction at least up into the, he always has these things because unless you do the cleaning method in the Sajmark system that cleans some scars, and even then on a personality level, you have to still battle your tendencies and desires. You have these samskaras, which I've talked about before. People have asked me how to spell it. It's SAMS, samskar, SKARAS. And if you go to my Gratefullness meditation channel, there's a video. There's a video here on a playlist for Gratefullness meditation on the Positive Future channel as well. But there's like an hour-long video that I give links to articles and things that talk about some scars, and I talk about them in a couple of videos on the Gratefullness meditation. Understanding impressions, past life impressions that come in, your addictions. Like he came in with addictions, impressions, and he's doing his best to rise up against them, which is, he gets credit for that as well. Doing it without a spiritual system, doing it on his own, self-effort is really difficult. Let's go to the other video here.
I remember when I first got sober, I was trying to really keep my life in that state of surrender all the time. My life got very big very quickly, and I was running through an airport, and it was mission critical that I got, this plane, and I was going to miss the plane.
So he tells this story in both places.
And as I was running, I was bundling up a little piece of chewing gum of Dentine, and I put it in my mouth, and then I threw the wrapper as I ran, and it went right into the middle of the trash can. But as I was passing the trash can out of the corner of my eye, I saw it bounce out again, and I thought, well, I made the shot, so that's God's fault. And I kept running because I had to make this plane. And after I got about 40 or 50 feet, it began eating at me. And I put on the brakes, and I went back, and I threw the wrapper in the trash can. And that was probably the most important thing that I did that day, because my life works when I make these little acts of surrender. And when I make enough of them in a row, I really feel God's power in my life, and I feel an internal serenity. And when things go wrong, I can be peaceful and help other people and be of service and do what I'm supposed to do. And I can be an effective person and be part of a community. Everything in my life that comes from my will is like wormwood and bile. It's short lasting and it's illusory. And everything that I do that comes out of a spiritual place is durable and important and long lasting.
So the issue here is, you can see he told this story on multiple interviews. Like he's gone around, this is what he's talked about. This is like a stump speech for a politician. So what if that didn't happen? What if that never happened? What if he wasn't O.J. Simpson in his way through an airport and he threw the gum wrapper and, none of these things happened? Or he didn't go back and pick it up, right? Or, this story isn't true. It's just something he made up. And that's always a possibility. And this is a little bit kind of a spiel, like if he was trying to pick up women or, win people over and have these ways of humanizing yourself to people, your way of, connecting with them. And people have these stories that happened, and then they tell these stories at a dinner party or whatever it might be to win people over and show how great they are. Like this is, part of what he's doing here. Which is, he's got to do this as a politician, and that is what it is, right? And so there's that part. Like, there's no escaping that part. There's no, that exists here. That's a part of what's the problem with, political life is that you have to say things and tell these stories and find a way to connect to people. And when you're going out in the material world, you're trying to show everybody how great you are, you have to have these stories. And these things that you say, to define yourself. You have these stories you share at parties or these anecdotes that you go on an interview with, I don't want to say Johnny Carson because I'd be dating myself, right? But I guess Jimmy Fallon or the Jimmy Kimmels or any of these guys, Stephen Colbert, they go on these shows, Conan, and they have these stories, right? The comedians have funny stories, and celebrities try to make funny stories, and they're trying to say, oh, I'm not some big celebrity, I'm just like you. Ways to connect with people. People think, oh, this person's a lot like me, right? And that's there with Kennedy here. But I feel like he's sincere, even with that part of it. There's just a sincerity here, and there's things that he's realized. Whether you have to realize the concept and the moral to be able to tell the story, right? That lying to yourself and what's important to you, doing the right thing, and humanizing yourself. Somebody, like he said, he has the ability to take a shower and just drop the towels on the floor and let his maids pick them up, right? Like he's realized he has privileges. My family and I, when we were in India, and my ex went back to America, and I had my kids, and we were going through a tough time in India, and I had the opportunity to hire a maid for $80 a month. The woman was a very pleasant young woman with limited grasp of the English language, and she came in, and for $80 a month, she came in, I think 6 or 7 days a week, 6 days a week, and cleaned the house in the morning and cooked a meal every day. Cooked a Indian breakfast, non-spicy for my family, like less spices. We got that across to her, and I didn't feel comfortable with it at all. Just based on my personality. My kids grew up on a farm, and they all had chores and things that they were doing. But it was something that we just had to have at that time. But I was never psyched about it, right? And I mean, I do, I scrub the bathroom, the toilet, and, in our house, and I cook a lot of the meals, and, my wife cleans up. We have these things, right? It's just primary labor, getting disconnected from your primary labor is not a good thing. And you should always do these things for yourself. Like there was a rich Indian guy, one of the, senior people there told me that this rich Indian guy, he went over his house and people were putting his shoes on and tying his shoes for him, right? Like they have, the ability to have multiple servants there because of the population and the poverty. They could hire, 10 servants for a couple $100 a month there, right? A driver and these things. And the rich people get detached from doing their own personal thing. And so, he's aware of that. Like he has to be aware of it to tell the story. Like, he's not completely a BSer. He has to be aware of it. He has to be able to have the understanding of the concepts to say these things. And whether there's a spiel or he's BSing, and I know he's not because he's a tortured soul. Like you can see there's, part of him is just he's tortured. They grew up with that, Catholic guilt and the scandals and the issues, and he has the, two addictions to drugs. He has an addictive personality, and he has a lot of issues, a lot of failures, a lot of embarrassment. And so, like, he's a tortured soul. He has that stuff, right? And he's working on it. Like, Yama and Niyama. He's working on the first legs of Patanjali's yoga. He's a newbie on this field, and he's a, materialistic person who's seeking a materialistic position in the presidency. But at least he's definitely, has some spiritual awareness. There's something there, and so, I mean, he's not going to change anything. He's not going to fix anything. I mean, he might make things better, but not, not in a way that the system can be safe. So there's that. Like, I'm not, he's going to be far from perfect because we've already seen what he did with the Palestinian debacle and, and not addressing the womanizing. So there's issues. Like, I'm not full on endorsing him, but he's definitely operating on a higher level than the other candidates. And that's good to see. Like, he's at least, as much as it's political spiel and stump speeches and, they're campaigning on this thing, at least he's moved into another realm. He's taken it to a higher level. And, we'll see how it all plays out, and I'm interested in it. But, I've sort of modified my position. I was supporting him in the beginning because of the positive aspect of what he's doing and the sincerity that's there. And he should get credit for that. But then there's things that he's not saying, the womanizing and the stuff that he failed on, the complete whiff that he put out there with the Palestinian thing. And so, it's going to be a rough ride with him. Like this is his best, and his best is on a different level than any other candidate that we've seen. And he is, seeking to be a truth teller, but he's also, it's performative. There's some performance here as well. And, you know, and that's a part of it. And I don't know if a political candidate in this atmosphere and climate can be, completely sincere and transparent and honest. The problem here is that people have a messiah complex. Here in the truth community, it exists more than anywhere else. And people come to a person like me, or, if God forbid a celebrity or somebody becomes a truther, and they like slather all over the person. I've seen it happen over and over again with, people who flirt with the truth community, Trump to whatever extent, and Isaac Cappy, and, all these other people, Roseanne Barr for a little bit. And, somebody who's successful comes in and verbalizes the things that we think about in the truth community, and people just fawn all over him. And it's important to understand that he's on a lower level here. That he is, I would say that he is a legitimate spiritual person and a truther, but, part-time. It's everybody struggles. Everybody, when you first step on the spiritual field, you don't become a saint overnight. You're now looking at things differently, and you're battle, and he's obviously battles. He's battling with his lower tendencies and working to surrender to God, and these things, and so he's okay. He's moved up to the next level, but the previous level of politicians, is the bottom of the barrel. Like if you compare him to Joe Biden and Trump, well, yeah, he's next level, but I mean, he's only he's above them. That's not great. That's commendable that he's, taken his campaign and his message and the stuff that he does to a new level of truth, right? Maybe even jumped a couple levels. He's, more sincere than some of the more honest politicians. I don't know. But, it's still a political process, and he's, a rich man coming from a rich family, and, he's entering the world of truth and the world of spirituality, and that's, again, commendable, but he's not a saint. He's not a messiah. He's not going to save you, or he's not going to save the system. But it's something different. Like, you should always support the higher level if there's a higher level, because it's, a step in the right direction, right? It's moving towards where we want politicians to be in the future, where they'd actually be spiritual. There's a great video out there somewhere on YouTube that talked about how in India, the scientists were also saints. In ancient India, they have scientists, people of science, but they are also spiritual people, where it's been divided here, where scientists often, doubt God, don't believe in a soul, and they're not spiritual. So you have to be both. Tesla, the scientist Tesla, was a spiritual person who channeled, and he had a connection to divinity. So the best scientists are ones that are connected to God, and the best politicians are ones who are connecting to God. And there's some sincerity in what Kennedy's doing here. He's marketing it as well, but at least he's marketing something that's good. And, there's a message of truth there in the spiritual aspect of what he's saying, right? And I can't say this enough, and I've included this in recent videos about the coup that's happened in America, and the reasons for the too big to fail, which talks about how the economy can't be fixed, and it can't be. You can't, fudge this economy anymore. And it's a demonic system, so it shouldn't be saved. I've made this point clear for the past so many years. And that's depressing for most people. It's scary and depressing because we're 100% dependent on the system, which I say all the time. And Kennedy isn't going to save us. So, that should be understood. Like, whatever you do politically, there isn't going to be some savior. And, the people who are limited in their ability to deal with the fear and the finality of our system collapsing, which is all of us to some extent, having someone come along that you think, will give you a chance and, oh, wow, he's different and, maybe he can do it. Well, that's just wishful thinking. That's not going to happen. But supporting somebody because they're taking it to the next level is, with the maturity and understanding that that in itself is the reason for support, right? That in itself is the reason for, the reward for doing something on a higher level. That he's doing something, that's different than what other people are doing and better. It's not the results that matter. That's one of the first things I learned as a spiritual person. I was written a letter by the third master of the system talking about how you do the work and you leave the results to God. And it was a letter that wasn't meant for me when I received it, but years later when I was made a preceptor for the mission and I was kind of bummed by, people coming and going and quitting, and it was frustrated with it. I went back and read the letter and it was totally made sense to me. It was almost like written. It wasn't like it was written for something when I got it, when I received it, and it didn't make sense when I first received it. The response I got from, the letter it was a reply to something I wrote to Master Chargy, the third master of the system. And when I read the reply, it didn't make any sense to what I read, to what I wrote to him. But years later, it made total sense, and that was telling in itself that it was written and for something that I experienced in the future. And so, this idea that you don't work for results, you work for God. You do what God wants you to do. You fulfill your assignment, and then the chips fall where they may. And, in this situation, there is, the results aren't going to be the ones that we want, like saving the system, turning this thing around, prolonging our lifestyle. That isn't, that's never going to be what happens. Like even just in a good system collapses. There's been all these empires that have collapsed, some of them good, some of them bad, some of them natural. The native peoples that used to live in America, there was 100 million Native American peoples living here. And there are some that are left, but, their lifestyle has changed dramatically and their way got wiped out. They were living a certain way for thousands of years, like, thousands upon thousands of years. I don't know exactly when they track the beginning of these cultures, but it might be 10,000 years or more. They lived a certain way. And, it was the same way, these aboriginal cultures all around the world. And then a modern system of colonization came in and changed all that. And it's a shorter lived system because of the debt-based economy and the disconnection from God and nature, and the depravity makes it like a less sustainable system, and focusing on material life and the ego and these things. And so, but all systems collapse. And how did it feel for the Native Americans to have this plague of this white man culture coming in and taking their land and killing their buffalo and changing their lifestyle and locking them up and putting them in reservations and, taking away all of what they understood as human life, what they thought life was all about, and imposing, becoming a subjugated people. It sucks. It sucked for them. It's going to suck for us, like it always happens. Don't think that you're beyond that, right? That this is, and the slaves that were brought here and these things. And you can try to justify it. I had white people saying that black people like to be slaves. People wrote comments on my channel saying like stupid stuff like that. Oh, they loved it. They wanted to be subjugated, right? We were doing them a favor. We were bringing them Christ. That's the excuse that you were saving their souls because they were going to hell and now they have Christ and they're not. This is the excuse that Christians use. And so, there's no saving a civilization. The civilization has its shelf life. It has its time in the sun. An empire has its time in the sun. Just like a human life has, you have your your prime years, your glory years, and you're going to die, right? It's like there's going to be changes, and no matter how attached you are to something, it's going to happen. And our change is coming. I don't know when, but it's here. We can all see it. It's there to be seen. The end of our way, the end of our, dominance on the human plane of existence in terms of the American European empire. And whatever happens afterwards, there's going to be, consequences for all of us because we're 100% dependent on the system. And whether we move to a higher level, a spiritual level, or whether we, become like some way, go back to Neanderthal ways of living. That's for us to choose. Are we going to go higher? Or are we going to go lower? Are we going to rise up to our spiritual nature and embrace our path of our soul? Or are we going to go to a lower level? Like that's the choice point for humanity as this unfolds. The choice isn't whether we save our system or not. The choice is what we do when the system collapses. So with that inevitability, there's nothing really to lose to support Kennedy. Like I don't know what I'm going to do, vote or not. I don't, doesn't matter to me. But he is definitely operating at a higher level. And we already know what we're going to get with Biden and Trump, and he isn't going to be worse. Like we literally have nothing to lose. The system isn't going to be saved. And, the candidates that we see there's two candidates that have the possibility of being president right now. And it's Trump or Biden. And we already know what we got with those two clowns. And so Kennedy isn't going to be worse than them. There's no way. He can't be. It's not possible. You can't get any lower than these two narcissistic puppets. And, the energy behind, there isn't even the energy of like, when there's somebody coming in new, there's a possibility of some changes, right? You don't know what the guy's going to do till he's elected. Like Trump did things that I didn't expect. Like the candidate that he was, there were things I thought he was going to be more of a war hawk based on how he campaigned, but he wasn't. He was against war. He didn't follow through on the wars that the intelligence community, the CIA, Kennedy says that the CIA's biggest job is to find ways to go to war for the military-industrial complex. And so Trump didn't buy into that. Biden did, right? Now with the war in Ukraine and the other things that, that have happened with him, the droning of children, Biden bought into and Trump didn't. So, I guess you could say Trump's somewhat better than Biden, and slightly, like a very low level, of grifters, sure. But we literally have nothing to lose, right? And there's always a trust issue with truthers. People who have been deceived in the past are, they're worried about being played again or whatever. I'm not going to fall for that again. There's this element of that in the truth community. But you're not trusting Kennedy. You're not giving him your heart. You're not, like that would be a mistake. Like that's the whole Messiah complex thing. You're not seeing him. You shouldn't see him for more than he is. You just see that he's better than the other ones that are there. And you don't have to vote. Like we don't have to. Like I've said this over and over again. We don't have to participate. It's like we are forced to make a choice. And for me, my voting days were over. My support of any sort of candidate was over. With Kennedy, he's different. There should be some reward. And, the reward from me is that I cover him differently than the other candidates, that I acknowledge that he has taken things to the next level, like I'm doing in this video. That certainly is true. But, the issues are there, the character flaws and the desperate nature of our situation where, I don't want to say desperate. It's, it's already been written. The end of our system has already been, it's already happened in the future. It's not avoidable, right? It's you can't divinize something that's demonic in such a demonic way. You have to do wholesale changes. If you're a demonic person, you have to rearrange every aspect of your life. You can't conduct yourself the same way and find God. You have to wipe away everything you did before and redo everything and become a completely new person. And you can do that. If you're an egotistical person, you can do that. Like you can become a spiritual person. But the worse you are, the more you have to change, right? People who are only a little bit, have, small character flaws, they don't have to change as much when they come to God. But ones with big character flaws, it's complete. They have to do a complete overhaul. And that's what has to happen to our system. There can't be a fixing of this system. There has to be a new system, which right now no one will accept. So there's going to have to be a collapse of the system for people to give way to a better system that's based in the divine laws and principles. And so the collapse is a necessary step in the evolution of humanity. And so, having said all that, the changes aren't going to be there in everything. He's not going to save it, but, he has done something. He's taken it to the next level. His relationship with the truth is a little bit better. It's, it's next level to what we've seen with other political candidates. Only spirituality will save this world. This is Paul Romano, definitely reporting from the Apocalypse and the Ascension. Everyone have a blessed day and be grateful.